Boa tarde, bem-vindos à segunda semana do romance gótico da Palestrante, organizado pelo Laboratório de Estudos.
Acho que a Jéssica caiu, será? Rafa, você pode apresentar o laboratório? Depois a gente volta com a Jéssica?
Posso sim. Boa tarde, pessoal. Obrigada por vocês se juntarem a nós nessa tarde para mais um evento promovido pelo LERo. E, antes de mais nada, eu vou apresentar o LERo para aqueles que não conhecem, né? E, em seguida, eu vou passar a palavra para o Rafael Valim, caso a Jéssica não volte. O LERo, Laboratório de Estudos do Romance, é uma instância vinculada ao Departamento de Letras Modernas e ao Departamento de Teoria Literária e Literatura Comparada da USP. Ele é coordenado pela professora Sandra Vasconcelos e pelo professor Jorge de Almeida. E, dentre os objetivos do laboratório, ele busca contribuir para o desenvolvimento e a divulgação do conhecimento na área de estudos sobre romance por meio de eventos como esse daqui. Vocês podem acompanhar as nossas atividades nas redes sociais e, enfim, é isso. Rafa, agora é com você.
Quer falar, Jéssica? Como você caiu, agora você voltou? Aí depois você passa para mim.
Só fui avisar que ano passado a gente teve um evento que foi no prédio da Letras. Aí esse ano vão ser 3 dias de lives e vídeos. Então vai ser de quarta até sexta-feira dessa semana. Então essa é a primeira live que a gente vai ter. Então fica o convite para vocês já assistirem os vídeos e as lives dos próximos dias. Já estão todos agendados aqui no canal. Então se quiserem definir o lembrete. Acho que é isso.
Obrigado, Jéssica. Bom, gente, eu queria pedir para vocês, por favor, deixarem um like aqui nesse vídeo. Se possível, se inscrevam no canal do LERo também. Compartilhem com o pessoal que gosta de literatura gótica, que se interessa por esse tema. Aqui no canal do LERo, a gente tem alguns vídeos de algumas oficinas que aconteceram este ano. Tem também alguns vídeos de alguns eventos muito interessantes. Teve um evento sobre Charles Dickens, outro sobre Anne Brontë. Então, eu super recomendo que vocês, por favor, se inscrevam no canal para acompanhar, né, algumas dessas palestras. E, bom, agora eu vou passar alguns recados mais específicos sobre a questão do certificado e sobre a questão do sorteio. Bom, como funciona? Caso vocês queiram receber certificado de ouvinte, vocês precisam participar de, no mínimo, 4 das 6 lives. Então, são 2 lives por dia começando hoje, 4 das 6 lives vocês conseguem o certificado. Como funciona? O registro de frequência será feito por um formulário do Google Forms. Então, para cada live, nós iremos disponibilizar no chat esse formulário, vocês precisam preenchê-lo, e aí, a partir desse preenchimento, você já tem a presença nessa live. Quando terminar o evento, a gente vai pedir para que quem tem interesse em receber o certificado, mande e-mail para semanadogóticousp@gmail.com com o nome completo, e aí nós iremos fazer, então, a checagem, ver quantas lives essa pessoa participou. Se você conseguiu participar de 4, 5 ou 6, você consegue receber o certificado, e a carga horária será a somatória da carga horária de cada live. Então é isso, se precisarem podem mandar e-mail também para a gente. E em relação ao sorteio, quando vocês forem preencher esse formulário, tem uma opção para colocar se vocês querem ou não participar do sorteio. Cada live terá um sorteio de um DVD, e aqui fica o nosso agradecimento público ao Dr. Fernando Brito e à Versace Home Videos, que cederam para a gente 6 DVDs sobre cinema gótico. Então o DVD de hoje é Edgar Allan Poe no Cinema, volume 1. Quem quiser participar, então, é só preencher, né? E aí, ao final da live, nós faremos o sorteio. Lembrando que cada formulário vale para a sua respectiva live. Então, se vocês quiserem participar do sorteio da próxima live, precisam preencher o outro formulário. E é isso, então. Qualquer dúvida, por favor, nos escrevam, se precisarem. E eu vou passar agora a palavra para o outro Fernando, explicar um pouco melhor como funciona essa questão dos vídeos e como será a palestra de hoje.
Boa tarde. Então, a primeira palestra do dia, ministrada pelo professor Justin Edwards, da Universidade de Stirling, será em inglês. Já as demais palestras do evento serão todas em português. Sobre as perguntas, a gente pede que vocês as deixem para o final, porque senão elas se perdem no meio do chat e a gente não consegue depois recuperar. Sobre o evento em si, todos os dias, então, nós teremos lives às 14 às 16 horas, e depois, a partir das 18 horas, serão liberados 3 vídeos por dia com conteúdo previamente gravado. Hoje, por exemplo, teremos uma apresentação do Laboratório Interdisciplinar de Estudos Góticos, Sandra Guardini Vasconcelos, uma fala sobre bruxas no cinema, e uma comunicação sobre curadoria de filmes de terror, feita pelo Fernando Brito, da Versátil. Então, não deixe de assistir mais tarde. E agora eu passo a palavra à professora Sandra, que vai apresentar o professor Justin.
Boa tarde a todos. Eu queria dar as boas-vindas a todos aqueles que nos assistem. Não tenho ideia de onde vocês vêm, onde vocês estão, mas imagino que pelos nossos eventos anteriores, devemos ter gente de várias partes do Brasil, o que é sempre um prazer. Bom, eu tenho a enorme honra de apresentar o professor Justin Edwards, que é um colega nosso, colaborador aqui da Universidade de São Paulo, onde ele já esteve 2 vezes. O professor Justin, como o Fernando disse, é professor da Universidade de Stirling, e ele é hoje um dos maiores especialistas que nós temos no mundo sobre os estudos do Gótico. O professor Edwards tem uma enorme produção, inclusive nessa temática. Eu não vou aqui, na verdade, dar todos os títulos que ele já publicou, ou como autor, ou como organizador, mas eu gostaria de fazer apenas uma referência, que é a referência que muito me honra, né, muito me honra, que é a referência ao volume que o Justin e eu editamos pela Routledge em 2016, com o título de Tropical Gothic in Literature and Culture, e foi um trabalho que nós fizemos juntos, tentando pensar justamente a migração, vamos dizer assim, desta ideia do gótico para aqueles lugares do mundo, né, nos quais o gótico não teve uma repercussão muito grande na sua origem, mas que depois encontrou um espaço bastante significativo para se desenvolver, seja na literatura, seja no cinema. Então, é uma coletânea de ensaios de vários autores, de vários lugares, que tem como tema comum essa migração do gótico para aqueles lugares que nós associamos aos trópicos. Então, eu queria, reforçar o meu enorme prazer de ter aqui o Justin conosco e dizer que esta palestra que ele vai nos oferecer hoje sobre o Antropoceno é, na verdade, uma área nova que o professor Justin está explorando. Então, Justin, it's an enormous pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. One of the benefits, one of the advantages of online events is that we can actually meet and be together, even if the Atlantic Ocean is between us, right? Well, I must say that I envy you that you are in London, you know that, but it's an enormous pleasure to see you again, and thanks very, very much for accepting our invitation. So it's all yours now.
Thank you, Sandra, and thank you to your students for organizing all of this. It's a great pleasure to be able to speak to you today about the Gothic and about my recent research. It's so important for us to do these things right now. And so we can feel so isolated, we can feel so disconnected from the world, and it's just so important to be able to have these conversations and be able to use the technology in order to connect. So thank you. I'm going to present today on Gothic in the Anthropocene, and this is a project that I've been working on now for the last couple of years. There's a book which is going to come out from the University of Minnesota Press in about 6 months' time, which is based on some of this research. And in it, I really kind of think about the ways in which we might approach the Anthropocene and theories about the Anthropocene through Gothic, and think about what Gothic can bring to bear upon our understanding of the Anthropocene. Now, in some ways, this is a way of trying to move beyond what is sometimes called eco-Gothic. Eco-Gothic, which so often looks at the kind of the thematics of place and the environment within Gothic texts. And this is an attempt to kind of get at a much more kind of theoretical approach to ecology and its relationship to Gothic. So I'm going to present I'll probably speak for about 40 minutes or something like that, and then we'll have lots of time for questions and comments. If something happens and I fade out, or you can't hear me, then please let me know in the chat function or comments or something like that. Gothic The Gothic is more apt than ever. The ruins of Gothic, the crumbling Otranto, Tintern Abbey, the southern plantation, signal that which is lost, the shattered remnants of a preeminent past. The landed gentry, the plantation owners, absentee landlords, the religious elites are all economic realities and contain the specter of a powerful history that haunts the present as well as the future. Those economic waves that flow from 18th century colonization into 19th century industrialization, into 20th century nuclear military industries, and into the 21st century empire of globalization and neoliberal economics, all arise within the detrimental imperious power of the Anthropocene and crash against a Gothic narrative that frames ecology in terms of darkness, death, and destruction. In an environment where ecological understanding is continually repressed in favor of a devastating economic system that produces and consumes itself, the snake eating its own tail, the return of that which has been repressed pushes to the surface under the accumulating force of its own steam, ready to explode in a mushroom cloud of global destruction that can be mapped out in the burning fallouts and nuclear freezes. Has winter come yet? In the face of disaster capitalism, the answer is a resounding yes. Disasters offer hyper-prosperity for the economic and political elite. Management by crisis becomes capitalism by shock. When New Orleans is flooded, public schools are replaced by charter schools. When a natural disaster hits Haiti, big business, government aid comes with the imposition of free market adjustments and debt obligations for those who are in dire need of assistance. Expressions such as hurricane colonialism, sometimes associated with the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, underscore how the ideological agendas of the political economic elite extend imperialist agendas that can be tracked back to, among other things, the cotton plantations of Mississippi, the sugar plantations of Jamaica, the tea plantations of Sri Lanka. The collapse of a region due to climate change is, like the collapse of the stock market, an opportunity for the elite. They buy it all up, increasing their wealth and power. It is not surprising that climate change denials are often disseminated from the top. An anthropocentric point of view glimpses the ruins on the horizon, imagines the number of days we have left, calculates the years of melting ice and burning fires. But such a perspective can no longer be sustained. Wildlife thrives within the fallout zone of Chernobyl. The absence of the human is far from the eradication of life. Gothic narratives point to that which is outside the anthropocentric, or at least they often do, offering horrified expressions that decenter the human animal and devolve the self into an uncanny weirdness. Gothic has decentered the anthropos in its human-animal-human hybrids, its monstrous forms, and its undead creatures. All of this can be mapped from the 18th century of colonization to the 20th century neoliberal managerial forces that we find in the plantation-like mods of the Amazon.com warehouses, which are unironically named fulfillment centers, where pickers are run by electronic devices that continuously count down tasks on the clock. The plantation has been digitized. The Amazonian Plantationocene moves from the global south to the North Atlantic, from the colonization of the Americas to the burning of the rainforests. The plantation has given birth to the monstrously accelerated agro-industrial economic structures that are set in a grotesque landscape of what might be, for the human animal at least, a derelict planet that can no longer sustain us, if only because we cannot contain ourselves. The exploitation of labor, the consumption of land, the production of destructive gases, the massive consumption of water are engendered by a monoculture and product wherein life, human and non-human life, becomes meat. Bodies are used up, bodies are consumed. This is perhaps most apparent in the intensive livestock farming that is based on the modern process of cutting out, disconnecting, and reducing life to production and death in monstrous proportions. Disconnection eliminates biodiversity and negates multi-species complexes. But disconnection is also necessary to sustain an economic system that is ecologically unsustainable. Therefore, I want to suggest we live in Gothic times. This has become, in some ways, a cliche in the critical literature, but in a new epoch that is overflowing with narratives of excess, exploitation, death, self-destruction, tipping points, and apocalypse, it has become more than a mere platitude. Gothic forms are as useful as they are pervasive. They can imagine apocalyptic landscapes ravaged by environmental destruction and consumed by zombification, as we see in, say, The Walking Dead. They can conjure dark terrains layered by plantation slavery and petro-economic cultures, as we see in something like True Detective. They can reflect the tortured bodies of non-human animals within the destructive economies of animal agriculture, as we see in a film like Hostel. They can depict the brutalized bodies of human animals when non-human animals bite back, as in Jaws. The realities of planetary destruction are disseminated in Gothic fictions. In the era of the Anthropocene, in other words, Gothic has the potential to present us with a realer, if darker, reality wherein we can imagine a future world based on what we have done in the past, whether it be excessive consumption, ravaging resources, killing, or other forms of transgression. In Gothic, the boundaries between fiction and reality blur to the extent that each interpolates and shapes the other, dismantling and all conventional patterns of differentiation. One way of thinking about Gothic and the Anthropocene I want to suggest is with reference to binaristic narratives that pit the human against the environment. We see this in classic narratives that focus on the haunted wilderness, the threatening jungle, dark forests, black lagoons, the Gothic sublime. In the early European Gothic novel, the land is neither elevating nor enriching. It is vertiginous. It is plunging, threatening the individual with lost control. It is a destabilizing force and source of instability that must be domesticated in the greenhouse, the flower bed, the lawn, the botanical gardens. Likewise, in territories beyond Mount Snowdon, the Lammermoor Hills, the Alps, the unmapped lands of other continents posed other threats. Here there be monsters. The dark place out there is the ecological space, a source of terror to be mapped and tamed into a homely sense of place. These byproducts of what I would call Gothic imperial conquest narratives appropriate the exotic and control the threat that is out there by bringing it in here. The untamed becomes the tamed. The colonies move to the metropole, so the unhomely is pressing into the homely. This supports the human's belief that we can improve on environments that pose threats to many of us. It is vital, I want to suggest, to think differently about Gothic and the Anthropocene. Bypassing binary thinking and moving outside the anthropos, it might be possible, to circumvent the teleological conception of the anthropogenic destruction of ecological systems and the domination, as well as extinction, of other non-human animals, which are taken as inevitable results of development within our species. The human has a destructive potency, a dominant force more powerful than ecology that is wielded over the planet. We have the power to trigger a mass extinction event, and we have the agency to prolong tipping points through planetary management and geoengineering. We are both the problem and the solution. A way of thinking that falls back on the self-referentiality of the human, its human-centeredness, is sometimes problematic. There is then the need to decenter the human in discourses on the Anthropocene, even though the anthropos of the epic inherits so much from a philosophical tradition that places the human at the center of life, the center of history. We too often revert to tropes, narrative, and concepts of humanity that position the human at the top of the hierarchical food chain, where humankind has the sovereign right of dominion over the entire globe. Animal agriculture in the Anthropocene has led to narratives of catastrophe and apocalypse. Methane gases released into the atmosphere produce radically destructive climate events. Mass drought and human suffering are brought about by water consumption and changing access to fresh water. The demolition of ecosystems such as rainforests and boreal forests distort micro and macro climates. An unsustainable feed for husbandry triggers extensive desertification and famine among human populations. These catastrophic visions are fueled by multiple socioeconomic conditions, ranging from the increasingly large-scale animal agriculture corporations to massive factory farms to powerful animal product conglomerates and imperious meat lobbyists. The desire for profit sustains a disregard for life. This indifference to planetary life meshes, I want to suggest, with the indifference to lives that are consumed within the factories that raise and slaughter the very non-human animals that we consume, or that some of us consume, for meat. Depending on where we live, animals may or may not be visible, but they do fill up the planet. Their presence is seen in the biomass that exceeds the human population, and a third of the planet's surface is given over to feeding animals. So even if we do not eat them or their products, we are still influenced by the capitalist biopower of the meat industry and its relation to the corporate enterprise and consumer culture that is woven into the fabric of the global bioeconomy. Within this process, then, it is not only the human animals, the non-human animals who are consumed. The planet is eaten away, and the workers who are exploited by the corporations are seen to be expendable. The same thinking that objectifies non-human animals intertwines with the objectification of human animals in a contempt for ecological concerns. What I am suggesting here is an extension of the argument put forward by Carol J. Adams in her influential book, The Sexual Politics of Meat, wherein she argues that meat consumption and violence against animals are structurally related to other forms of violence, specifically violence against women. Adams demonstrates how many cultures equate meat eating with masculinity, and she points to the significant links between the prevalence of a carnivorous diet and patriarchal attitudes, particularly the idea that the end justifies the means, and the objectification of others. This objectification is integrated into the labor market of animal agriculture. The expenditure of bodies in this industry is not limited to cows or to chickens or to pigs. Human labor is also consumed, and with it, the bodies of the laborers. According to the US Department of Labor, as well as Statistics Canada, there are over 1 million full-time and part-time workers on Canadian and American factory farms, where billions of animals are raised and slaughtered for human consumption every year. Factory farm workers, often people of color, and migrant workers from Latin America, many of whom are undocumented, are exploited so that their bodies become mangled, distorted, disfigured, and sometimes expire. In most cases, they do not earn a living wage. They suffer from exposure to harmful gases, repetitive stress disorders, cardiovascular problems, and premature death. Driven by rigid contracts set forth by corporate employers, factory farms consume their workers to maximize profits, and the violence towards non-human animals extends to the violence against humans. This is the domino effect of objectification. We have reached the stage in the Anthropocene wherein the objectification of animals in corporate agriculture is indifferent to ecological decline, catastrophe, subjecting animals to torturous violence that is part of an objectification, wherein the workers who work on the factory farms and who are employed to raise and slaughter the animals, the other species, are subject to abuse by the corporations that exploit them. The binary that separates the human from other species begins to fall away. And what we are left with is a form of cannibalistic capitalism that extends Marx's vampire metaphor, the constant sucking of the worker's blood by a corporate body that appears to be vampire-like in its desire and ability to suck the life out of those on the abattoir floor. Yet instead of overcoming the stranglehold of objectification by and non-human, is vital for understanding the impact of the Anthropocene, and Gothic narratives are rich sources of material for such an exploration. For instance, the treatment of animals is intimately linked to the violence against humans in a text like Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat from 1843, wherein the drunken narrator of the story has a deep bond with a beautiful black cat named Pluto. One night, though, in a gin-soaked rage, he turns on his beloved cat Pluto and gorges the cat's eyes out with a penknife. This, alas, is a prelude to a murderous rage that leads the protagonist to kill his wife with an axe. Similarly, in over 100 years later, Ian Banks's novel The Wasp Factory from 1984 focuses on a character named Frank, whose life on a small island in rural Scotland, where he takes pleasure in collecting the bodies and the heads of the small animals that he kills and the dogs that he burns. As the narrative unfolds, it is revealed that Frank murders 3 of his relatives, 2 cousins and his younger brother. The literary critic Xavier Reyes correctly identifies the slaughterhouse as a significant Gothic site for exploring violence against human and animals. And he reads the abattoir as a place where the horrific treatment of non-human animals bleeds into the exploitation and and abuse of people. Reyes identifies abattoirs in Gothic texts such as Matthew Stokoe's Cows from 1991 and Joseph Delancey's Meat from 2008 as dehumanizing machines that are oblivious to the suffering of livestock or workers and that are driven only by corporate greed and profit. Here, slaughterhouses foreground a potential collapse in speciesism, and given that factory workers, human factory workers, are regularly and severely physically compromised in animal processing plants, people are frequently victimized and disenfranchised by monopolistic business practices in the animal processing industry. This means that community members are physically endangered by the presence of meatpacking factories at a local level, but human communities worldwide are also threatened by the overall effect of concentrated animal feeding operations on things like climate change. Recognizing the impact of the local slaughterhouse can, I want to suggest, extend outward to the planetary effects of anthropogenic violence on human and non-human animals. And recent Gothic texts, such as the French-Belgian co-production titled Raw, a film from 2016, include representations of the mesh of violence that is incorporated into institutions not directly related to slaughterhouses or the animal processing industry. Here in this film, the techniques of power around the consumption of meat work to induce docility by an unquestioning carnivism. This extends to the suggestion that the living body must consume non-human animals to enliven the living body by fueling our energies, fueling our engines, if you will. The normalized body eats meat, so the narrative goes. The rest are relegated to the margins, labeled as abnormal. This then legitimizes human speciesism that excludes non-human animals from the protections that is, at least in theory, afforded by the human community. On the other hand, though, following Michel Foucault, the biopolitical form of governing in modernity includes a detached and technical stance towards lives, turning individuals into life as a mass and a resource, so that speciesism is unsettled and humans enter the same biopolitical nexus as other animals. Rather, biopolitics is, above all, a strategic arrangement that coordinates power relations in order to extract a surplus power from living beings. This is one way, I want to suggest, to reconnect our embodied being, our animal nature within the human, to other beings, and conceptualize human subjectivity and our relation to the rest of the living world, to other species. But when we move beyond the abattoir, we can find other ways of thinking about animal alterity, particularly when the violence is turned back onto the human in fictional animal horror narratives such as Cujo, or The Birds, or Jaws, or even Moby Dick. Here, dangerous and transgressive animals elicit fear and suspense. They seek to challenge the predominance of the human through physical, sometimes consumptive violence. Such representations of violence call attention to the spatial and conceptual separation of the human and the non-human animal. And it is this very separation that prepares the ground for horror narratives that depict the spaces where humans and animals come face to face with one another, and in some cases, cross the conceptual borders that separate them. The erasure of this space sparks anxieties about human supremacy, but it also reminds us of the entanglements of the human and non-human animal experiences and the implications of that entanglement within wider contexts. An eco-Gothic reading of Jaws might, for instance, focus on how advanced capitalism, unsustainable tourism, and overfishing have engendered anthropogenic damage to the environment that has led to the revenge of the animal. The return of that which has been repressed arises out of the animal violence directed at the human body. In this scenario, animal revenge narratives can force us to confront the gaze of absolute alterity, and other who looks back at us from its own point of view, and through its threat of violence, we can acknowledge the animal other as having power that is comparable, if not identical, to our own. But what I am particularly interested in here today are those animal revenge texts that focus on the livestock of industrial farming, animals raised as the walking dead, the beings defined as meat, the animals grown to be consumed. I am thinking particularly of films, one which was made in 1973 called Pigs, or AKA Daddy's Deadly Darling, or the Irish cattle horror film, which is titled Isolation, which came out in 2005, or the horror comedy, which is called Thanksgiving, which came out in 2008, as well as another one called Poultrygeist, which came out in 2006. And what is important for me as well is another film for thinking about this, a film from New Zealand, which is called Black Sheep, which came out in 2006. Now, in all of these livestock horror films, the animal is not the passive object of husbandry, farming, or industrial animal architecture, and as a result, these films tend to disrupt the smooth unfolding of human supremacy, wherein the animal serves as a simple source of protein to feed the anthropogenic population. Such films, I want to suggest, have the potential to envision a just and necessary animal revenge that mirrors the geographical and epistemic colonization that has been disrupted by anti-colonial struggles, decolonization movements, and post-colonial thought. The exploitative structures of animal agriculture are in these films, at least, sometimes imagined as the real horrors. Even when animals are depicted as monstrous, their actions are still justified in the context of an anomalous agency that seeks freedom from repression. Livestock horror then challenges the very idea that the human is the rightful flesh consumer, not the consumed. And as a result, these films are distinct from other animal revenge narratives. In those other texts, retaliation arises when the habitat is damaged or destroyed by human actions such as clear-cutting forests or the use of chemicals or polluting water systems. As Jennifer Schell points out, the typical animal revenge plot suggests that ecological systems are capable of restoring the environmental order that has been disrupted by human contact, thus saving the earth and the human animal from itself. The revenge plot in livestock horror, I want to suggest, is distinct because it is not the habitat of the animal that is being destroyed. Rather, it is the injustice of the cruel imprisoning of the animal and the brutal violence involved in the production of meat that leads to the animal seeking revenge. Any positive ecological impact that might be derived from this reprisal is an added bonus, not an end in itself. The real threat then does not come from the aliens of outer space or psychopaths like Patrick Bateman or werewolves or ghosts or vampires, but from animal agriculture itself, from turkeys, from chickens, from cattle or sheep who rise up in these texts and slaughter the human population. There is, of course, the possibility of an animal rights activist agenda in these films. The savage treatment of the animal by the human highlights the imbalance in power relations that turns the text into narratives of revolution as much as revenge. The animals that strike back here at the human exploiters who incarcerate and abuse the living dead livestock fight for their freedom. They try to reclaim their liberty by overcoming oppression. Yet the livestock horror film relies on the problematic issue of animal agency. The revolutionary spirit of the sheep, cattle, or pigs assumes a form of agency that needs to be qualified in terms of powerlessness that animals have when it comes to the human-animal relations. And as a result, there is a profound inconsistency in the very notion of animal agency in these texts. In the majority of livestock horror movies, there are actual livestock on location, but these actors are then transformed into imaginary, highly crafted images of monstrous animals through models or costumes or makeup or CGI or other forms of special effects. The narratives depict these animals as having some kind of agency. They are self-directed beings with the ability to plan a revolt and seek revenge on the human who has imprisoned them and intends to slaughter them for meat. The irony here is that the actual livestock on location while shooting are forced to move in particular ways and stand in certain positions, thus calling attention to the very lack of agency at the hands of humans. Likewise, the highly stylized and artificial images of monstrous livestock foreground the artifice of the action of insurgency that we see on the screen. The livestock do not possess the agency in any significant way. These texts, I want to suggest, help us to reflect on the possibility of a future that is unique, different from current human-animal and animal relations. They interrogate the boundaries between species and the ethics of killing, eating, and the consumption of meat, human meat and animal meat. They call attention to the ethics of murder, or meat as murder, and they suggest that we need to understand a metaphysics of subjectivity that does not exclude the animal, but deconstructs the binary or boundary that separates the human from the animal. The exclusion of the animal is, in fact, part of the problem. This is all the more important now that we see how industrial farming damages ecological systems in many ways, and that at the heart of this is the impact of a plantation structure based on mass production of life for the very purposes of death. This simplified practice strips out all complex multi-species entanglements, ambiguity, and complexity, engendering monocultural life that is easily damaged and controlled to breed massive profits. In this, corporate animal agriculture is part of a monocultural sphere of plantations which turn our planet away from the complexities of biodiversity and regenerative ecosystems. Texts such as Raw or Black Sheep or Thanksgiving or Poultrygeist or others reveal the biopower of hierarchical arrangements that pave the way for a destructively transparent path that is easily accessible and unidirectional. But the corporate path that reduces all life, plant, animal, and human life, to mere profit will inevitably light the flame that will burn down the Plantationocene, leaving it in the ruins of the Gothic. Thank you.
An amazing talk. Thanks very much for sharing your new research with us. I was listening to you and thinking, you know, how incredible it can be to use this category we associate with, you know, text and literature and with the past, and how we can actually update it and use it as an instrument to think about our present, and not only about our present, but also about our future. You have mapped out, in fact, in your talk, the kinds of issues that are absolutely, you know, burning at the moment. I mean, we need to tackle all these problems. Otherwise, I think there's going to be no future for us on Earth, right? I keep thinking of Sir David Attenborough and his documentaries, and telling us the clock's ticking and our time is running out. We won't have much time to save the Earth, and we are endangering everything. And I think that the way you reflect about the relationship between the human animals and the non-human animals is absolutely amazing. It is horrifying. It is frightening, to say the least. I mean, when you think about it, and you think, this is what we are doing, right? I mean, this is exactly what we are doing. And listening to you, I was thinking, how do we get away from this? How do we sort of stop this? And you said, well, but you yourself gave the answer at some point when you say we are the problem, but we are also the solution.
Yes, that's it.
But the thing is, how do we change people's attitudes? How do we make people understand that they have to stop all this?
Yeah.
I mean, your argument is not only a reflection on a very, very contemporary problem, but it's also sort of a wake-up call, isn't it? It's political.
Yes.
I mean, it's really political, and it's a wake-up call saying, "Come on, listen, wake up." So how do we go about this? And I'm no, sorry, just one last comment.
Yes.
No, it's just that how the Gothic becomes such a useful, let's say, as I said, instrument, weapon to think about these contemporary things. This is what I find also. Because, we listen to, we hear about the problem of the destruction. We hear all about these things, but I had never, honestly, connected this with the possibility of using the Gothic to read this contemporary situation. So amazing. Great. Thanks very much.
No. You're making me blush now. You're making me blush.
No. Blush. You're supposed to be proud.
Yeah. I know. Thank you. I mean, I think to answer your last question first, the Gothic has always been about destruction and death and ruins, and it's always been about that which is excessive, and and all of those things, and that which is corrupt and so much more, and about that, thinking in complex ways about what is human and what is not human, and what is life and what is death, and things that are in between that, the undead or whatever. And so the questions about death and destruction are always present in the Gothic, and I think that one of the things that we need to do is to kind of change the way people think, is to have narratives and to have ways of telling these stories, telling the stories of the way that we're living as being a kind of death drive, movement towards death if we don't stop. And I think that we can find those narratives in the Gothic, that the Gothic offers us a kind of plethora of material for helping us to rethink what we're doing and to articulate what we're doing. And when we have the narrative and when we have the language, we can then begin to think about how we might begin to change. I think one of the problems is that we really have trouble imagining what a tipping point means. We really have trouble imagining, the complete and utter the ice caps melting, right? I mean, yes, we see it sometimes on TV with bits of it, but it's really difficult for us to imagine so much of that happening, right? And Gothic and narratives like that can help us to articulate, to imagine, to put into narrative, that can then lead people to reconceptualize and rethink their daily actions, the kinds of things that they do on a daily basis, because you're absolutely right. It's a highly political topic, right? And I don't think you can write about the Anthropocene and literature in particular without kind of moving into that realm.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many ways that we could take that. And I mean, I chose here to focus on the consumption of meat, the consumption of animals, methane being such a huge producer of greenhouse gases that is incredibly destructive. The consumption of water, the consumption of land, the destruction of deforestation, all these things become linked to the animal agriculture industry. And one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on that here is because that's something that we can do on a daily basis. That we can become aware of these things, we can imagine these things, we can understand these things, and then we can make daily decisions. We can make daily decisions, maybe not to consume meat, maybe to have tofu for dinner instead of chicken or whatever. It's those kind of daily decisions that then become political, right? And that become a kind of political act to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that form of consumption. I'm not going to contribute to an industry that is destroying the environment in this way, and to make ethical decisions about the things that we do in our daily lives that then have much larger impact around the world and across the globe. So I think Gothic has lots of potential for helping us to understand, helping us to articulate, helping us to put things in a narrative. And once we've done that, help us to think about what we might do on a daily basis in our choices, in the ways in which we conduct our daily lives.
Yeah. While you were commenting on my comment, I was thinking whether the pandemic that we are all experiencing, because this is a world phenomenon, right? If that would somehow contribute to people becoming more aware of what's happening, because the pandemic is also connected with this whole the idea of the whole destruction of the ecosystem, the relationship between humans and animals and all that, right? So I mean, and it's also to do with consumption. As far as I know, as far as I've read, I'm not sure if this is a theory we can believe in, but we don't even know how the virus ever came into being. But I mean, there are theories that connect it to this, to consumption as well, right?
Yeah, and the fact that it spread so quickly and across the globe shows it to be a kind of byproduct of globalization, right? And a byproduct of the ways in which we are interacting with each other, economic systems that we have in place, the movement of people, the consumption of fuel in airplanes, and the movement of people, the travel industry. I mean, you're absolutely right that the global pandemic is a byproduct of an economic system that is unsustainable, and I think that people are beginning to see that in some ways. I mean, look at the pictures of the Venice canals and the way in which the Venice canals are suddenly thriving and flourishing. Certain parts of North America have just far more animals now that have come back, that have been because of the people are not present in certain places, and most importantly, though, it's changing the ways in which we are conducting our daily lives. It's changing the ways that we're working. It's changing. It's recognizing that we don't need to get in our cars and go to work. It's changing our daily habits and our daily routines in ways that we can recognize now that are possible. And maybe before we didn't recognize those things to be possible, but now we do, and now we have that. we have that experience. We think, oh wow, why didn't I do this before? You know, why didn't I why didn't I work in this way in the past? And not that I want to be, I'd rather be with you guys than a
we
computer.
don't have to do that every week, right? I mean, let's say we can be a little more economical about traveling and about I don't know, even working from home, which is something that is doable, right? I mean,
it is. Yes. Yeah. So I think we have a real possibility now to change the economic system, to really think about how we change our daily lives, work, economics, and all those things. Whether the political elite is going to allow this to happen, whether there's going to be a kind of dominant discursive backlash against what I'm saying, I think there probably will be, and I think that's already been happening. But that's not to say that there's no hope. I think we are facing a real possibility here.
Yeah, maybe we are less pessimistic down here because we have seen our forests burning.
Yeah,
and we have seen our Pantanal, which is this very wet region, has also been burning. So it seems that they're destroying everything, and people couldn't care less, and people just don't care. The government doesn't care. So I'm not that optimistic, concerning Brazil, but I do hope that we can get somewhere from here. But I mean, I don't want to sort of monopolize our talk here. I suppose that there are questions on the part of those watching you. So can anybody help me here with the questions? I don't know. Rafael, Rafaela, Fernando, Jessica, you are the ones that are following the. Oh, there are questions here. Can you see it on the screen? You can?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a question about the violation of certain thresholds, and that's absolutely right. The Gothic does break down those distinctions between life and death, between human and animal, and that's been part of Gothic narratives going back to the 18th century. Absolutely, that kind of violation, ideas about transgression, transgressing those. And I think I think we have to think about the ways in which Gothic can help us to imagine a kind of a breakdown in the separation between how we function within capitalism and have a kind of not a disaster capitalism, but have an ethical economic system. It might be capitalism, or it might be something else. I don't know. It's hard to imagine a world outside of capitalism. But we need to imagine some kind of systemic change within a kind of economic model that then can sustain us socio-economically as well as ecologically. We need to see those things come together, and I do think Gothic has the potential to do that. Absolutely, it can help us to imagine a world in which we are radically different, and Gothic always does imagine those kinds of worlds, and it has great potential for that. So yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Not only can Gothic do that, I think we need to do that. I think that this is what's so pressing.
Are there any questions that? Okay, there's another one here. Well, that's you see. So perhaps we should tell the people sort of following us that they should wait for the book, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yes, this is part of a book which will be published. It'll be out in about 6 months' time. The University of
Minnesota. It's almost ready then.
Yes, yeah, you can read it then. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So Guilherme should wait a little bit more, and then you can get the book and read all of it. But then you have the recording anyway, so the video is going to be available. You can always listen to Justin again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And the book will just be called Gothic in the Anthropocene. So
it would be easy to find, right? The same title of the lecture. So, any other questions? Any other questions? It's amazing how productive this whole thing can be, because I mean, with a category like that, we can actually put together literature, film, politics, ethics, let's say the economy, ecology. I mean, it's really interdisciplinary in that sense. I mean, you cannot bring all these things together to reflect on a problem which is very, very urgent, isn't it? It's calling for an urgent solution. Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely right. And that's why I like the term Anthropocene, because it encompasses so much, and so much eco-criticism tends to be quite limited, and Anthropocene it opens up so much more debate, I think, and much more fruitful from my perspective.
Now, while you were also giving your talk, what came to my head all of a sudden? I remembered Blade Runner, the film, not the this late one, the one that is I don't know, came out in 2018 or 2017, I can't remember, but the first one, the original one. And I kept thinking, because there's something Gothic about it as well, and then it's also about this let's say blurring of boundaries between what's human and what's not human, and the whole atmosphere, and that sort of bleak atmosphere, raining in gray all the time, which also sort of brings perhaps anticipates this whole discussion, doesn't it, in a way?
Yeah. No, Blade Runner is a really good example. You have that that dark setting. It's always raining. The people are having to leave the planet because the planet can't sustain itself anymore. You have the replicants. You never know who's the replicant and who isn't. Is the animal real? Is it unreal? Is it the person real or they unreal? And Deckard himself, the main character, we never quite know if he's a replicant or if he's human. And so that kind of relationship between life and death, human, non-human, animal, non-animal, as well as that dark setting, that the destroyed planet, the planet in ruins, really has that kind of Gothic feel to it, for sure.
Yeah.
Really
that's the film that came to me, where we were. I'm not the ones you mentioned, because I don't, apart from Jaws, I think. I'm not sure I'm familiar with the other ones.
Yes, yeah. They're not huge commercial successes, or with the exception of Raw was quite a big art house film from a few years ago. But the other ones are more smaller films. But they're quite interesting. They're really good for raising these issues and thinking about these issues.
Well, let me see if there are any other questions. Those of you, Rafaela, Fernando, Jessica, those of you controlling the chat. Did you visit the Amazon?
No, I've been to Brazil several times, but I haven't had a chance to visit the Amazon. So one day.
Yes, after the pandemic.
That's right.
Hoping the Amazon will be the trees will still be standing, the forest will still be standing.
Yes.
Even Brazil, yes.
Yes. I've been to Brazil several times. Yes.
Yes. But São Paulo only, right? Justin, did you go anywhere else?
And Rio, São Paulo and Rio.
São Paulo and Rio, yes. Yeah. So Justin has been with us for a few times, but we need to sort of do that again, bring you back, bring you over. I know there's the whole question of the footprint, and I know not traveling by plane frequently, but I mean, there's no way for us.
No, we have to sometimes. We have to.
Yes, we can't take a train. We can't, drive. We have to do that.
Yes.
And any other questions? Any other questions? Somebody's saying here. Let me read this to you, Julia. I don't know. She says, Julia Maria. She says, Raw is one of my favorite movies. I think it's a great way of thinking about female sexuality as a self-sustaining entity through cannibalistic imagery. Would you like to comment on that? I can't say anything because I haven't seen Rob, so it's up to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. I mean, Justine, the main character, is a young woman who's exploring her sexuality, and also she's a vegetarian, right? I mean that's the one of the premises of the film. But then her getting this overwhelming desire for meat and raw meat, and how that's linked to her development of her female sexuality, but it's also so much more, because then it becomes part of that kind of cannibalism that she develops into. It's significant in Raw that they are students at a veterinary school as well, of course, because the veterinary industry, of course, is vital for maintaining animal agriculture. And it's vital for the meat industry more generally. So Justine in that film is interesting. She wants to go and help animals as a vet. But of course, a lot of her fellow students and their discussions throughout the film are just there really to participate in the kind of exploitation of animals and support the meat industry. So it's a fascinating film on so many levels, I think.
Any other comments? Anything else? No, there's people saying that they think Raw is an amazing film. I like Raw a lot. I have to see the film. I haven't seen it.
Yes.
There's Luciana for you. See?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Luciana. Hi.
Okay. I think if there are no more questions, I think we can thank Justin for such a thought-provoking and exciting talk. Thanks very much for sharing your new research with us. And now we are looking forward to the whole book.
Yes.
So finish it.
Thank you. Yes. I will. Yes.
Take advantage of the fact that you're not going back and forth from London to Stirling, from Stirling to London, and just finish it.
Right. All that time. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for organizing this. This was great. Thank you, Sandra, and thank you to your students.
It was great to have you. Anytime. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye. See you.
Então, em nome de toda a comissão, a gente queria agradecer ao professor Justin pela fala, pela excelente fala, e antes de encerrar, a gente só vai fazer o sorteio do Edgar Allan Poe no Semana, volume 1. A gente já separou todo mundo que teve interesse, foram 196 interessados, cada um recebeu um número, por ordem de inscrição, e o número sorteado foi 142. Então, quem ganhou foi Aline Cristina Moreira de Oliveira. A gente tem o seu e-mail aqui, então depois a gente entra em contato para ver sobre a entrega do filme. Então, e muito obrigado pela participação de todos. A nossa próxima fala é às 16 horas, então fiquem apostos que em breve a gente já começa a próxima.